Hi everybody, Fred the Pirate here, and I'm here to do a review of Game of Thrones Season 3, Episode 10, entitled Mhysa. This is obviously the season finale of Game of Thrones Season 3, so a really awesome season. Alright, a couple things happened in this week's episode. Obviously, we start out with actually a pretty light moment between Tyrion and Sansa, and it's really nice to see them getting along, because I was kind of surprised of seeing them have such a friendly relationship with each other, so early on, considering, the circumstances of their relationship. So that was kind of interesting. And then after that, we get a scene, I believe, with Bran, Georgian, and his sister, and so they end up staying in this abandoned structure. I think that was abandoned by the Night Watch at some point. And so Bran is a little bit uneasy about staying in this place because apparently there's this little ghost story about this chef who ended up killing a prince because of a grievance he had with the king, and then serving the dead prince into pie for the king to eat, and apparently the king enjoyed it, and as punishment for doing this, the gods turned this cook into a white rat who would cannibalize his own young. And so Jojen's sister is like, well, I'm pretty sure there's nothing to worry about, and she makes a joke. It's like, I'm pretty sure if every killer got turned into punished by the gods, there'd be a lot of people turned into rats or whatever. And Bran explains that the reason why this chef was turned into a rat wasn't because he killed somebody, and it wasn't because he made a king eat his own son. It was because he killed someone who was his guest. And apparently this is a pretty big taboo in Westeros. So apparently you're not supposed to do this. And so as a result of this, we get a segue with Lord Frey, where he's talking to Bolton, and that they're talking about the events of last week's episode, where they talk about what happened with the Red Wedding. And Lord Frey makes a bunch of jokes about how everybody, all the High Lords look down on him, how Ned Stark looked down on him, and how Catelyn's dad looked down on him. And and he's kind of saying, well, who had the last laugh now? It's like, you guys all laughed at me, but like now all you guys are dead, and I'm the one sitting here, and he congratulates Lord Bolton about it. And so Lord Bolton asks him if he's going to go to Winterfell soon, and he explains no, because the castle's in ruin. And so Lord Frey is kind of talking to Bolton. He's like, well, how exactly did that happen? And so Bolton tells him about what Theon did, and about how ultimately Theon and his compatriots were captured by Lord Bolton's bastard, Ramsay Snow. And so Ramsay is the one who has Theon, and so he is the one who's been torturing Theon. And we see a couple moments of that in the episode, but we finally find out who the guy is who has Theon. So it turns out that that Bolton captured Theon like he was supposed to, but then Rob apparently didn't give a shit about Theon. At least that was what he says, but I think this is probably suspect. And so that's why Theon's in the custody of Ramsay, who's kind of a psycho. So pretty much we get, like I said, we get a couple episodes of scenes with that. We get a scene with the small council where they're talking about what happened with the Red Wedding. And so there's this one scene where where Joffrey and Tyrion kind of go back and forth, and which that's to be expected, where, Joffrey's really excited that Rob's dead and he wants to parade it. And, he mentions that, he wants to, tells my Master Pycelle to write to Lord Frey and to thank him. And he also says, make sure that he sends me Robb Stark's head because I want to serve it to Sansa on a platter for my wedding. And Tyrion, obviously interjects, and he's like, she's not yours to torment anymore. And Joffrey's like, bullshit, I'm a king, I can fuck with everybody. And so they kind of go into it, and, Cersei kind of intervenes. And then, obviously, interestingly enough, Tywin starts intervening, and, him and Joffrey start getting testy with each other, which is pretty interesting. Like, it's kind of interesting to see how Joffrey's, initially, I think, in season 1, and obviously early in season 2, Joffrey still kind of respected Cersei, and he definitely still at the beginning of season 3, he definitely still respected Tywin. But it's kind of interesting to see as time goes by that slowly he's like starting to lose his respect for them, and he's starting to get more I guess more arrogant, but I guess it makes sense. Like, he is the king, and what he says is true. Like, he can kind of do whatever the fuck he wants. Like, it would be great if he was a good king, and if he was like, not an idiot, but it is what it is. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. I'm kind of looking forward to what happens with Joffrey and Tywin's relationship as time goes on, because obviously both of them are very proud people. And I mean, obviously, Joffrey's really arrogant and really pompous, and so it's like, and he's starting to obviously become more that way, and it's obviously at the same time that Tywin, doesn't take shit from anybody. And it's like, I think it's really going to be interesting to see how, those two really tussle with each other in the coming seasons, because, yeah, I'm definitely looking forward, because it's obvious that they're now starting to butt heads, and so that's going to be a real interesting conflict to watch. So then right after that, so pretty much Tywin dismisses Joffrey and says, well, you're just tired, and so that was pretty interesting, like I said. And then obviously we get a scene where after everybody leaves, where he talks to Tyrion, and he's telling Tyrion, he needs to, consummate his relationship with Sansa, and he needs to get her pregnant. And, Tyrion responds like, I'm not going to rape her. And, Tywin's like, I don't care what you do. It's like, you need to do what you need to do. And he's like, you need to stop, worrying about the whims of some silly girl, and start figuring out how you're going to better your family. And, and they have a really interesting relationship with, a really interesting conversation with each other, where Tyrion's like, it's easy for you to say that it's the job of a man to better his family without selfish regards to himself. But he calls out Tywin, and he's like, well, what have you done for our family that was not something that directly was in your best interest? Because honestly, Tywin's always did what's been in his best interest. Like, he has very little regard for the wants or needs of any of his children. Like, he doesn't care if they're happy. Like, he just wants to look good and be powerful. And he responds to Tyrion that, it's like, I could have, when you were born, I wanted to send you out to sea and drown you, but that I decided not to because you were a Lannister, and I decided to raise you. And so we definitely had another very soul-crushing Tywin-Tyrion moment. And then after that, we have a very brief scene with Tyrion, where he goes and he talks to Sansa, and he's prepared to tell her what happened, but when he sees her, she's already crying and she wants to be left alone. So pretty much, obviously, what happened with Robb, just completely just undid any of the progress that Tyrion and Sansa made at the beginning of the episode. Which is, like, I think that's why, like, the beginning part was really important, because it showed that they did have a relationship, or at least that they were developing one, and now everything just went to hell, so they're going to have to rebuild another one if they ever do. Yeah, so that's pretty much what happened. I think right after that we get a very interesting scene between Varys and Shea. And so pretty much what Varys does is he tries to bribe Shea with a bunch of diamonds to leave, and he explains to Shea that, you know, Tyrion is probably one of the few people who can really do something good for the country. And it's like, and he says, you know, he tells Shea, you know, you're a liability to him. It's like, I know you love him, and I know you love him for real, but it's like, you know, you need, like, you're not going to have a future with him. You know, he's already married to Sansa, and it's like, you know, you can't have any future with him. And it's like, here, take this bag of diamonds, go to some other country, buy yourself a nice house, get yourself a husband or something, you know, and get yourself a real future. Because, you know, he tells her, like, you're a liability to Tyrion, and it's like, and if Tyrion gets killed, and if he gets hurt because of you, like, that's probably gonna fuck up the country, because, like, he's the only good guy. Like, he's one of the only good guys in a position of power to do anything, and you're his only weakness. It's like, if you go away, he has no weakness. Nobody can touch him. Nobody can fuck with him. And it's like, I need you to go so I can help the country, because I have to deal with Daenerys Targaryen over in another country, and I have to deal with Baelish doing little finger shit, and it's like, I have to deal with psychotic Joffrey. It's like, Tyrion's the only good guy, and it's like, you're a liability, and it's like, you need to go. And so the way Shea does this is she refuses it, because what she thinks is happening is she mistakenly assumes that Tyrion has cowardly put Varys up to telling Shea to go away, which obviously isn't what happened. And we can tell this from Varys' expression that, you know, he's doing this of his own accord. Like, Tyrion has no idea this is happening, but that's not what Shea thinks. And so, you know, she's obviously offended by this, and, like, obviously she's extra offended because she thinks that Tyrion made Varys do his dirty work, which that isn't what happened. Like, Varys is just doing his own stuff. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see the ramifications of that, both in, obviously, Shea and Tyrion's relationship, but obviously how Tyrion deals with Varys, because, like, obviously he's going to have a conversation with Varys, like, what the hell did you tell my girlfriend, man? I'm like, all pissed off at me, like, what did you do? I thought we were cool. Yeah, so it'll definitely be interesting to see the ramifications of that. Yeah, so I think, yeah, that's pretty much what happens with that. We do get a scene, not directly afterwards, with Tyrion drinking with Podrick, and then Cersei comes and, you know, she has a conversation with Tyrion, and it was a fairly cordial conversation between the two of them. You know, and she tells Tyrion, it's like, you know, you need to start manning up, and you need to give Sansa some babies so she can be happy. And then Tyrion's like, well, you have children, and how happy are you? And she's like, I'm not that happy. But she's like, you know what, if I didn't have my kids, I would have thrown myself out of a castle window a long time ago. And she says, like, my kids, you know, even Joffrey, are the only reason why I'm alive right now, and why I put up with all the shit I put up with, because I put up with it for them. And it's like, and, you know, you should give her a child so that she can have something that's hers and something that makes her happy. And so that was definitely a pretty interesting conversation. Yeah, so we get that with them, and then we have an interesting moment back up, way up toward the wall, where we're back with Bran and Jojen, where they're in his sister, and Hodor, where they're in the area they are. And it turns out that while they're sleeping, that Sam's came up through a passageway in the well that they were staying with. So they meet Sam and Gilly, and Sam explains to them what's happened. He's like, you know, you should, like, he recognizes that Bran is John's brother because of the dire wolf. And he's like, I know what a dire wolf looks like. And at first, like, Sam and Jojen are kind of being cagey because they don't know who the fuck Sam is, but he explains everything that happens, and he's like, you should come to Castle Black with us, where it'll be safe. And Bran explains what he needs to do, and he explains that they need to go across, behind the wall so that they can stop the White Walkers because they're aware of the White Walkers because of their magic powers. And Sam's like, I don't really think this is a good idea, but ultimately he assists them and he gives them the dragon glass to help them out in case they run into the White Walkers. And he's like, there's some serious ass shit happening, so just be careful. And then obviously, so that's what happens with them. We get a later scene with Sam where he finally makes it to Castle Black, and he ends up meeting the Maester, and he introduces the Maester to Gilly. And at first the Maester thinks that Sam broke his vows, and that Gilly is his lady friend, and that the baby is his. And he explains that Gilly isn't my lady friend, and the baby's not mine, and I haven't broken my vows. He explains that, she's one of Craster's wives, and that he's assisting Gilly to get away because it's dangerous above the wall. And he explains to the Maester what happened, and the Maester knows what he means. And so the Maester ends up sending out, having Sam pin some letters to all the lords to tell them like that shit's going down here. And yeah, and then after that we get a pretty interesting scene between John and Ygritte, where John's at this washing, and it turns out Ygritte's found him, and she's alone, which is weird. It's like, I don't know why she's alone, and because I don't see how she would have gotten away. But they have a moment where he tells Ygritte that he needs to go home, and then he tells her that I love her, but I love you. That's I don't, she does, nothing, Jon Snow. And he explains, I don't know love, but I know I love you, and I know you love me, but it's I need to get home. And the whole time this is happening, she's holding a bow to him, and after he says that, she shoots him with some arrows, which is a pretty interesting scene. So I have to say, it's honestly, I think most people like to complain about their breakups, but I don't think most people relationship ends with them getting an arrow to the knee the way John's did. So the next time you're complaining about how your relationship ended, just think about John and Ygritte. Yeah, so that was an interesting scene. Honestly, I don't know if it was necessarily needed though. I don't really think it served any purpose other than we got to see John get shot. So I guess if you really don't like John, that probably was an awesome scene, but I don't really know how needed it was. And so obviously after that, we get a scene where John gets picked up, where he manages to ride his horse back to Castle Black, and he ends up getting there, and they end up finding him, and Sam comes up to him, and he has John get taken up to see some medical stuff. So that's pretty much all that kind of happened up north. We get a couple scenes early on with, we get an interesting scene with Arya and Sansa, where they come across some of the Frey men bragging about killing Robb and her mom. And so what she does is she jumps off the horse before Sansa can do anything, and she walks up behind these guys until they notice her, and she's like, hey, you give me some food, and they tell her to fuck off. And she's like, well, I have a coin, I have some money, and she shows them, and it's like, what kind of coin is this? And she's like, well, it's a coin, and she ends up dropping it, and she says sorry, and she puts on this really demure act, where you wouldn't suspect anything. And so when the guy goes to pick up the coin, she stabs him several times. So she kills this guy, and then his buddies try to go in there, but Sansa intervenes, And so he's like, tells her, like, the next time you want to pull some shit like that, like, let me know ahead of time. And he's like, and like, is this the first guy you killed? And she's like, first man you killed? And she's like, yeah. And she's like, well, where'd you get the knife? And she's like, well, I stole it off you. And he's like, what? And so he ends up checking himself, and it turns out she did take his knife. So that's actually rather impressive, because I imagine it would probably be pretty hard to steal, like, pickpocket hounds. So definitely a pretty interesting moment. So obviously, after that happens, Arya picks up her coin, and obviously the coin that she used was the one that she was given by the assassin guy last season. And so I think it's obvious that she's kind of planning, since her mom and brother are dead, and pretty much a lot of her other family members are dead, that, she's probably, I think it's obvious that she's planning on, meeting up with her assassin buddy, and, and maybe doing some stuff with him. So that'll definitely be fun to see if that's actually what's going to happen. So, and honestly, I think and I think this reminds me of what Melisandre said to Arya when they talked. It's like, I see a lot of eyes in you, and that pretty soon those eyes are going to close. And I think Melisandre's prediction of Arya, becoming more dark and more, brutal, I think obviously is coming true. Like, I think she's definitely, I think she's kind of given up on being a nice person, at least to some extent. So it's obviously she's becoming a more brutal, savage person. So that's definitely been interesting to watch, and it's definitely going to be interesting. Honestly, it's probably going to be really fun to watch Arya now that she essentially has nothing to lose. Like, she has nobody to go back to. So it's like, and she has no one to answer to. So it'll definitely be interesting seeing that and the ramifications of that. So that was an interesting scene. And speaking of that, we did a cool scene with a couple scenes with Davos and Stannis and Melisandre. We get one scene where Davos talks to Gendry, and he explains to Gendry that he's from the same place that Gendry's from, that he's not a noble born, that he was born in the slums like Gendry was, and he talks to him, and Gendry explains, Gendry mentions that he doesn't really trust highborn people. And Davos is kind of like, well, you initially trusted Melisandre, like, what's up with that? And Gendry admits, like, well, she was a hot lady and she was naked, and it's like, and I haven't been with a hot lady, so it's like I kind of just trusted her. And so Davos says, I can understand that. And so Gendry talked to him, and she's like, how exactly did you become Stannis' hand? And he's like, well, I helped Stannis out. And it's like he said, initially I was going to refuse his offer, but I wanted to make a better life for my son. And so Gendry asked, like, well, what happened to your son? And then he said, well, he's dead. And he's like, and then Gendry asked, like, well, how'd he die? And Davos answered, well, he died following me. Which, that's pretty tough, because I think it's obvious that, Davos really regrets that. And I think, Davos is kind of one of the few kind of good guy characters. And I guess it kind of just seems like if you're a good guy character, you're probably going to get shit on a lot in the show. So, so we get that scene with them. We get a scene with Davos and Stannis' daughter, where he's reading mail that's been sent to Stannis, and he's fulfilling his hand duties. And, and Stannis' daughter's like, well, instead of reading those boring letters, like, why don't you read books about, the dragons and stuff? And, he's like, I would, but I have business stuff to do. And it turns out, while he's doing that he got a letter that Sam sent out from the Watch, and it's talking about the White Walkers, and that there's some serious shit going down. And then some horns start blaring, so he tells Stannis' daughter to stay in a room and to lock the door, and because stuff is happening. Because at first they're not sure if they're being attacked, but it turns out that the horns are celebratory because they've gotten word that Robb has been killed. So they're in a somewhat celebratory mood, as celebratory as Stannis is going to be. And so they have a conversation with him, and Davos says, well, are you gonna blame, are you going to praise like the fire god for this, or are you just going to admit that, that Robb got screwed over by his bannermen? And so Melisandre's like, well, it doesn't really matter, but it's obvious that, obviously, my God helped out. And she's like, eventually we need to sacrifice Gendry so we can win the war, because Stannis is like, I need to use Gendry's, magic and blood stuff so I can, get to the throne, because, Robb's dead, but I'm not any closer to the throne. And so after that, we get a scene where Davos frees Gendry, and he tells Gendry, keep rowing until you get to King's Landing. And Gendry's like, well, the gold cloaks are after me. And then Davos is like, the gold cloaks have been after me for 20 years. And he's like, do they know your face? And he's like, no. It's like, good. And he's like, and he tells Gendry, have a bowl of brown for me, and just, do your thing. And so he says, you need to worry about Melisandre more than you need to worry about the gold cloaks. Yeah, so then after that happens, we get a scene where Davos has been caught, and he explains to Stannis what has happened. And Stannis, sentences him to death. So Davos admits that what has happened. And he said, I had to do it because, I felt that the methods you were using were evil. And so I felt that this was the best thing to do. And Melisandre was like, well, yeah, you saved one innocent, but think about how many other innocent people you doomed, which I think is a fair point. It's like, I can certainly understand Davos's concerns about using dark magic to win a war, and the ethics of that. But at the same time, I think Melisandre does bring up a good point. It's like, the longer we fight this war, the more innocent people have died. So really, I think both of them have fair points. So definitely pretty interesting. But before he gets taken away, Davos says, well, you may have sentenced me to death, but you haven't removed me as hand of the king. And so he says, you're going to need me. And then he hands Stannis the letter from the Mhysa from the wall, and that talks about the White Walkers. And Stannis is like, well, when did you learn to read? And I think Davos lies, and he said, my son taught me before he died, so that I could be more useful to you. And which isn't the truth, because we know Stannis' daughter taught Davos when he was in jail. Yeah, so then Stannis hands the letter to Melisandre, and she looks it over. And at first, Stannis is going to tell Davos to fuck off and have him get killed. But then Melisandre's no, you're going to need him, because because Davos, before that, Davos is like, you're going to need me to bring back your army, because we have some serious shit going on. And it's like, and you're going to need me. And Melisandre agrees with Davos, and she's like, you are going to need him, because the shit that's happening on the wall, it makes everything that's happening with the political stuff not mean anything. And so, Melisandre kind of gets a little cracking at Davos, and she's like, your army is now going to be, the army for the God of Light. So it's like, you're going to be serving my cause now, even though you didn't want to. It's like, you're going to be serving my cause. So that was certainly interesting. We get a scene early on, earlier in the episode, where with the Greyjoys, where Balon and Theon's sister get mailed, essentially they get mailed Theon's dick in a box, in a letter from Bolton telling the Greyjoys, you need to give up your land, and you need to get out, or else I'm going to capture you guys, and I'm going to torture you guys. And so Theon's sister talks to Baelen's like, "What are you gonna help Theon?" And he's like, "Fuck Theon." It's like, he disobeyed me, and he's an idiot, and I'm not giving up my lands for him. And so she's like, "Well, I made my own decision, and I'm gonna take the fastest boat we have, and I'm gonna take the most brutal guys we have, and I'm gonna sail up inland, and I'm gonna go get Theon." So yeah, that was a pretty interesting scene. Definitely going to be interested in seeing the implications of that. And then obviously, after the Stannis Melisandre scene that I mentioned a second ago, we get the last scene of the season in the episode where we meet up with Daenerys, and where she's got in front of Yunkai, and they open up the doors, and all the former slaves come out, and she says, "You're free now," and and they have a little moment with that, and apparently, like, they all end up thanking Daenerys, and they end up calling her Mhysa, which is why the titles of the episode's name, the title it is, because apparently it's a word in their language for mother, so they're congratulating Daenerys for saving them, and they're like all happy and shit. And so pretty much we get like a couple minutes of that, which honestly, it was, at the surface, a very inspirational moment. I don't know, like, honestly, I don't think it was very necessary, and honestly, I think we might be getting into some iffy areas with Daenerys and her stuff. And I think one of my fellow Game of Thrones reviewers, Melina Pendulum, I think, has brought up this issue of we're kind of running into some issues of Daenerys kind of becoming like a mighty whitey, which is where you have a situation where a white character ends up being all heroic and saving all these minority characters. And I think you can see this, a good example of this is like the movie Dancing with Wolves, or the movie Avatar, where you have this white character who comes in, and that he uses his awesome white peopleness to save these oppressed not white people. And I think we're starting to kind of run into that issue with Daenerys, where obviously Daenerys is a white person, and obviously all of these slaver cities that she's going, and all of these slaves that she's freeing are non-white people. And so we're kind of, and obviously particularly in this moment, like, she's literally being worshipped for saving these people. And I think we're kind of running into problems. I think this would be less of an issue if there were, I guess, I think this would be less of an issue if we had more prominent people of color on Game of Thrones. And I think it would obviously be less of an issue if not all the slaves she rescued were non-white people. I mean, because obviously it's kind of starting to become iffy because we don't really have any prominent people of color on Game of Thrones, and so obviously we're getting into some sensitive territory. I kind of hope the show watches out for that. Like, I like Daenerys, and I like her being a badass, and I like her liberating cities, but at the same time, I don't want a mighty whitey Daenerys. Like, I don't want that, because like that's not cool. And like, I want Daenerys to be an awesome character, and I don't want to have to worry about like racist and rather offensive overtones and undertones to things. And and honestly, like, it's kind of getting to the point where I know the mighty whitey thing probably isn't intended, but it's starting to get really obvious, and I hope that the show rectifies that. It's like, we need to have more prominent non-white people in the show. Like, it's like, I don't know how they need to get them in here, but like, we need some prominent non-white people in the show who don't get killed off. Like, we need some color in here. And obviously, Obviously, we need Daenerys to not be a whitey, the mighty whitey, because like that's not cool either. Like, I don't want to see racist shit in Game of Thrones. Like, I like Game of Thrones, and I don't want racist shit in there because honestly, Game of Thrones probably has enough problems with dealing with sexist things because, obviously the fact that Game of Thrones feels that it's necessary to put in arbitrary sex scenes all the time doesn't help stuff. It's like, it's like it's bad enough that sometimes you're kind of sexist. Show, like, don't also be racist. Like, let's try to be as unoffensive as possible. Although I will admit, I think the show definitely, at least the last couple episodes, has definitely been better about especially this scene, it's definitely been better about cutting down on the completely unnecessary and arbitrary sex scenes. Although it kind of fucked up with Daenerys' bath scene, which was like totally not necessary, but it's like, it's getting better. Because I know there was a lot less arbitrary nudity in sex scenes this episode as opposed to the first and second, so it's getting better. Obviously, we're starting to get kind of iffy on the racist overtones, though, because obviously, like with the mighty whitey shit with Daenerys, like again, like I hope the show addresses that because, like, it's. Like, especially in this episode, like, this was, like, really prominent, and, like, that shit's not cool, so hopefully the show deals with that a little bit better and a little bit more tactfully, because, like, honestly, it's 2013, like, we need to not have, like, racist undertones and overtones in shows, like, it's, like, especially because this is a really cool show, and it's, one of the more smarter shows on TV, so it's like, let's not do racist shit, especially because it's not really necessary. I mean, and honestly, I think a lot of the towns that Daenerys is going into and liberating, I think a lot of them are based on, like, Mediterranean, and obviously Middle Eastern, but, more Greco-Roman cities. And the thing is like, with Greco-Roman cities, like, yeah, there were slaves, but, like, they were all kinds of different races and ethnicities. And, and I wish that influence was more shown. It's like, if you're going to have Daenerys rescue slaves and you're going to have them worship her, at least let them be, like, all different colors of people, because it's starting to get really awkward that she's only rescuing brown people and that only brown people are worshiping her, because, like, that's kind of getting weird. Yeah, so as far as that, this was a good episode and a good season, and definitely looking forward to next season, and I can't believe we have to wait a year. That sucks so much. Yeah, so with that said, this was a great episode, and this has been my review of Season 3, Episode 10, entitled Mhysa. So I want to know your guys' thoughts and opinions on this week's episode and on the season so far. Obviously, make sure to not have any spoiler comments about the book, because I just watched the TV show and spoilers aren't awesome. Yeah, so with that said, it's been great talking to you guys, and I'll talk to you again next time.